Rob, I have to continue our conversation about fast food because I'm living a whole new life here in North Carolina, in America. A whole new set of fast food, worlds, new avenues have opened up to me. And I had something that we've talked about in the past. Last Friday, I guess it was. I had a fried Oreo, and it's really good.
A fried Oreo?
Yeah, I think we've talked about it. We've definitely talked about deep fried Twinkies before, I know.
Mm-hmm.
This is an Oreo, and they deep fry them. And what happens to an Oreo when it's deep fried is they get really soft and melted. So it really is, and they have a coating on them, of course. So and then they put powdered sugar on the outside. So what it's really kind of like is a donut with molten chocolate in the middle.
That actually sounds really good.
Yeah, which is quite good, but it's very filling. I will guarantee you that it's not good for you. And,
of course.
And Jennifer thought she was buying one. It turns out she bought 6.
Right.
And fortunately, there were 3 of us, but I had 2, which was 2 more than I really should have had. At least 1 more than I should have had. But there was that. So that was tasty. And then the same stand was selling something called a banana pudding taco, and I have to say I did not try that. But banana pudding is a very southern dessert, really. It's usually like a vanilla type custard pudding with bananas chopped up in it, and these vanilla cookies as kind of a crust, form a crust in it or suspended in it. And I guess I don't think they were probably putting it in a regular proper corn tortilla taco. My guess is what they were doing was they were using something like a waffle cone for ice cream and shaped like a taco and calling it a taco. At least I hope that's what was the case. Something that's actually more sweet.
I've had a dessert like that.
You have?
I don't remember. It wasn't banana pudding, but I've definitely had some kind of waffle type thing that was shaped like that. So it was like, so they could make it go, oh, look, it's a breakfast, like a banana taco or whatever.
Right.
So that's definitely a thing that exists. And presumably it's not even that difficult to make something like that anyway.
Interesting. Well, because I did see an ice cream taco recently also. And I'm not talking about the Choco Taco, which was in the news 3 or 4 weeks ago as being canceled and then coming back, and it turned out to be a social media stunt, as most of these things do. I was at I discovered an ice cream shop out in the country that serves their ice cream one of the options is in a taco, which definitely there is a waffle cone. So that's what gave me the idea.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's fine. I think it's good to have different delivery methods for your ice cream. I'm definitely a big fan of just spoon straight into a tub, but each to their own.
I'm partial to the cup only because it's less messy. Especially on a hot summer day, I think a taco could be a disaster on a really hot day.
Yeah,
even more so than a cone dripping down the bottom. Now you got it coming out both ends. I'm not so sure that's a great idea. But it's original. It's different. If you want to be a little different with your ice cream, I would definitely go for that option.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it sounds like you're doing a nice bit of exploring to find some new food.
Yes, if what you mean by exploring is eating my way across the South, yes, that is what I'm working on.
I mean, that's the dream.
It really is the dream. You move somewhere new, it's like it's a whole new world of junk food, and
you just sort of
plowing through it, one restaurant at a time.
You just move across the entire country. By the time you get to the end, you're like 3 times the size you were when you started.
Exactly. Well, food trucks are much bigger here than they were back in Illinois too. They were highly regulated in Illinois, and so they were never a big deal in downtown Chicago primarily because they weren't allowed to pull up within a certain distance of a restaurant, just to kind of that was like a regulation to protect the restaurants. And so they never became a big deal in the downtown area, at least. And they never really caught on in the suburbs where I was. But down here, like a lot of bars will have, a lot of pubs will have, a food truck. They don't have food service, but they'll have different food trucks come every Friday and Saturday, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's pretty good. There's a few sort of local breweries that do that. around here where they, you know, they've got their brewery in a warehouse or wherever.
Right.
And then they have like a pizza truck or, you know, burgers, whatever. And they just have those, and that's how they handle the food. And like you say, they don't actually have their own food service because they don't need to. They can just get local, you know, food trucks in for, you know, the days that are actually busy or whatever.
Yeah, that's big here too, because there are a lot of breweries in North Carolina, a lot more than back in Illinois. Well, that's enough for Unhealthy Food Corner. We should move on and maybe talk about technology and the betas, which I'm running all the betas, Rob. I'm up there doing all these betas.
I am running none of them because I'm not brave enough.
I've even got WatchOS 9 going.
Oh boy, no, you're really going for it. No, because what tends to happen, and I'm sure we've spoken about this, I'm imagining every year since we've done this podcast, I tend to get tempted. You know, I see the new features, like this year it'd be, you know, the lock screen stuff.
Right.
And I see it, and I install it, and then, like, some really important app is broken, like my bank. Or, you know, because my primary bank I use is an app-only bank, so it's kind of important that works. And I will install it, and then I will panic like an hour later, and I'm like, oh, I can't wait for the next version, and I end up just restoring it again. So I'm like, oh, I've used it for an hour, and that's it.
Well, I have heard from a couple of people in the UK that their bank apps didn't work. I don't know which apps they were, but I know that that's happened to some people.
Yeah, I know specifically that Monzo is the bank I use. That does actually work on the betas this year.
Okay.
Which did kind of tempt me, but then this was like a week or so ago, and I thought, you know what, I can just wait like another, I can only assume it's going to be about another 4 weeks or so.
Right, at this point it's pretty close.
Exactly, like I can wait another 3-4 weeks and just install it then, and at least I kind of know that in theory everything should work. I mean, there's still going to be bugs and stuff, but at least the primary apps that I use should be working.
Yeah, we're getting to a point now in the cycle of the betas where I am starting to get a little concerned about the bugs. I try to be really objective about bugs in the sense that I don't expect there not to be bugs, and I don't expect the software to be in very good shape at the beginning of a beta period, but I do expect to see it and be able to feel it tightening up towards the end. And I'm not sure, and we're definitely not there yet. It's now that there's weekly betas, I wouldn't be surprised within the next week or two it really starts tightening up and getting good. If it doesn't, then I'll truly be concerned. I haven't really, I've got my eye on it closely now, but I haven't really raised what I would like a warning light that I'm concerned that it's going to be a real problem. None of the stuff I've really run into has been terrible. I mean, probably the worst thing, let's see, what are the worst things right now? The share sheet is completely broken for me some of the time, where I hit the share button and there's just nothing in the share sheet. And if I tap around in a few apps and then go back, I can usually get it working again. The share sheet is like notoriously a problem area in every single beta cycle, and I don't know why. But it's pretty broken still. Test Flight on the Mac won't download or update apps, period. And that is not a problem at the moment, but that's going to be a big problem for what I do for a living very soon.
Right, yeah.
Because I literally can't get the apps to download at all. And so I have betas expiring of apps that I'm testing, and unless they fix that relatively quickly, there's just apps I'm not going to be able to test very well. Fortunately, I still have a laptop on Monterey, though.
Yeah, remind me again. I can't remember if this was a rumor or if Apple confirmed it. Have they delayed iPadOS release, or was that just a rumor? I can't remember now.
Well, it's a rumor reported by Mark Gurman. Like, Mark Gurman has sources that say that it's going to get kicked a month, and if that's the case, Federico will do a split review, iOS and then iPadOS. That seems likely to me because, one of the big features, probably the biggest feature for the iPad, and really the Mac for that matter, is Stage Manager. And Stage Manager is actually quite stable on the Mac, but it's not so great on the iPad. I have had, I think, fewer problems than Federico, although that may be in part because he just works on the iPad more than I do and has noticed it more. But for instance, the external monitor support is very shaky and doesn't work very well. Still, and there's a lot of other little UI bugs and other things that are problematic. That's probably on the iPad. The biggest problem is probably Stage Manager. On the Mac, there's really nothing that's really bad, other than like Test Flight is a particular personal one for me. And then on the iPhone, the share sheet has been really kind of troublesome. But beyond that, it's been there's a lot of little things here and there, but nothing huge. But I do feel like a lot of the many little things haven't been going away as fast as I kind of expected they would be. It's it's a weird balance. Like when you're dealing with this stuff and reviewing it, it's like I constantly see people on Twitter, oh, this is an outrage. These betas are so terrible. The world is collapsing, and Apple doesn't care about software design anymore, and it just makes me tired because one of the things that I always like to think of myself as is an optimistic reviewer. And sometimes being an optimist in life makes people think that you are a mouthpiece for Apple or, a fanboy or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And I don't think that I'm that. But I also am not going to ding them during the beta period for problems that are, unless they're incredibly egregious and don't look like they're going to get solved. So I think people just need to take a deep breath. I think one of the things right now that bothers me is seeing all the angst about Swift UI, and on the one side there's the people who are like Swift UI is an abomination. On the other side there are the people who are like, well, it's not Swift UI, it's just developers building bad apps. And it's well, the truth is actually a lot more complicated, and they're both probably right, and to a degree. Swift UI is still immature and can't do everything that some people would want it to do. And since the beginning of time, it's been possible to build a really bad app with any framework. You don't need to be.
Oh, of course.
Right? It's like I feel like this is an interesting thought I had the other day. I'll run by you, Rob. Is that with iOS, we had when iOS 7 came along, we went from this heavily skeuomorphic design that everybody was at the time really into, and they just threw it out and went 100% with this flat design. And it had a lot of problems, granted, but I also feel like it was good in the long run for iOS in the sense that iOS didn't get tied to this notion that there was only one way to make a good iOS app, which was the skeuomorphic design. Whereas I do feel like we're still, to a degree, stuck in this notion, and there's this nostalgia for 90s era delicious library style app, right? The delicious generation of design with the real chunky 3D look and very polished, and that there's and I don't mean to really denigrate good Mac app design, because there's been a lot of good Macs over the years, a lot of good Mac apps over the years, and there still are. But I also feel like there's an awful lot of people who hold back from change for the sake of holding back on change, and that I think there are good reasons for the Mac to evolve right now, and I think that there can be changes to the design language that, even though they're different, being different doesn't make them bad.
Oh yeah, absolutely. One thought I've had about sort of all of this, because obviously this sort of starts, WWDC, and everybody installs the betas on, even watches and the Mac and stuff like that, and it's become this thing where the opinions that I'm seeing, whether they're good or bad about whatever it is, whatever these changes are, whether it's Stage Manager or a lock screen or whatever, most of the people I'm hearing it from, they're not developers. It's become like a yearly thing where it's almost like everybody is on a year cycle that starts at WWDC and not in September, when the average person who has an iPhone and will just upgrade and be like, oh, the lock screen's different, and they will think nothing else. They'll install the Mac update and they'll go, oh, settings has changed. It looks different. Whether that's good or bad, I haven't used any of them. I haven't really seen this settings change beyond sort of seeing that the UI's changed. But like, it's as if everybody's on this offset cycle where we have to spend 2 months like talking about all the things, and then by the time it gets to your average person who doesn't even know that there's been a beta cycle for the last 2 months, they're just like, oh, okay, yeah, everything kind of works and it's mostly fine.
Right. Well, I think there are a couple of different things going on there. One is, I think that there are a lot of people who run betas who really shouldn't, because I do think you have to have a high tolerance for hassles and issues. And I literally run a beta probably 300 days of the year. So
yeah,
it's just the normal state for me. But I also try to remind myself that it's not the normal state. The normal state is when the public release drops. And then then I think it's fair to criticize any shortcomings. But I do think that there are people who get on the betas at WWDC and expect it just to work like it's going to in the fall. And I don't think that that's a fair approach. The system settings that you mentioned is a very good example of all of this, because there are spots in the system settings where the UI is fundamentally broken and a mess. And I think that those are valid criticisms to be leveled at it. I think it's still too early to really be beating the drums hard on it, because I think that there are UI changes that they're not fundamental to the way the system settings work. They still work the way they normally did. And most of this stuff are UI glitches that need to be ironed out. And I think that there's still time for them to be ironed out. But there's also the criticism that it shouldn't have changed in the first place, which I think is wrong, because I don't think system preferences was particularly good to begin with. And two, I think there's a lot of value in there being some familiarity between the way settings works on a Mac and the way settings works on an iPad or an iPhone, because the vast majority of people who are buying themselves Macs these days probably had an iPhone or an iPad before they ever had a Mac. And right. And so I feel like, and this is a cultural community thing where a lot of people who are really into Apple have been that way for a very long time. And if you've been that way for a very long time, you probably started using Apple products before the iPhone existed. And as a result, the iPhone is the add-on. You know, the iPhone was the little buddy to your Mac in the early days, right? It had to be tethered to get music and apps on it.
Right.
And that's not true anymore. It's its own thing, and it really eclipses every other product that the company makes. And so there's a lot of reasons why those two things should behave. Not necessarily, they shouldn't necessarily do the same things, but you shouldn't have to learn a whole new set of ways to do things just to move from one to the other. So I think that there are good reasons for it to change. But at the same time, it is kind of broken at the moment. And this is where like Twitter is just the worst, because Twitter just doesn't allow for that nuance between, yes, you know, there's reasons for this to change, but there are also problems. You can't have any kind of nuanced discussion about anything on Twitter, and it's where a lot of this, I think, you see a lot of this coming from.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I don't know. I mean, I know that I was one of these people. Not one of these people, but like I would run the betas every year. You know, I'm not a developer. You know, I used to do the thing where you'd like, people would sell you like their slots in the developer program before it was sort of easier, and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and I would make a mess of my phone. I'd lose contacts and all of that kind of stuff. And, you know, I've got to the point where I just don't care anymore. I'm just like, I'll just wait till September and install it. But, yeah, it's just a bit exhausting seeing a lot of criticism for something that isn't finished. And in reality, you know, yeah, settings will change, but do you know what? Things are going to change. Like you say, if there's bugs and there's UI things and things that are legitimately broken, okay, yeah, fine, that's like legitimate criticism, but
right,
maybe everyone just chill out a little bit.
Yeah,
like,
I just think it gets
out.
And I think it just gets worse with the Mac, only because I think that there's more resistance to change on the Mac, and I recognize that about myself, that I actually like it when things change. I don't like them to stay the same. And I know that that's unusual, because I've talked to many people who have told me that it actually stresses them out to hear how often like Federico and I change email clients or task managers, because they can't imagine what it's like hopping from one system to another multiple times a year. And I kind of get that, but I mean, it's just kind of our thing. And it takes, I guess, a unique personality to be okay with that. But
yeah, definitely.
So I try to be sympathetic to people resisting change. And I don't think change for no good reason is a good idea either. But I do like that, especially on the Mac, that it's evolving now, because I really do think it was stuck in the mud, especially, I don't know, until the M1s really came along and Mac OS started moving along with it and evolving. The Mac was in a really bad spot a few years ago. And now it's probably the most exciting platform we've got, really, if you think about it. I mean, the iPhone, yeah, we'll get a better camera this fall. The size might be a little different.
Right.
The colors might be a little different. But we're not going to get it. It's pretty mature, too, now. So it's not going to change radically probably this year. The same really goes for the iPad to a large extent as well. So I feel like the Mac is where a lot of the exciting stuff is happening now. And so hopefully, I don't know, that'll continue. I'm sorely tempted by the iPad, the MacBook Air, Rob. I really want one. The new M2.
I know, it's so nice. I want one. I mean, what do I need one for? Like, my computer is still fine. I have to keep reminding myself I do not need a new computer.
Right. Well, and for me, the thing is that I have the M1 Air, and it's really good for 90% of things. I just know that there's enough more polish on the M2 that it would make a meaningful difference, because I could get one with more memory and it has a bigger, brighter screen. Those are the two things primarily. Because I think the memory, I do bump into the memory once in a while on 16 gigs, but I feel like 24 might be actually ideal for me. But I don't know. And I'm not willing to just like buy a new Mac every year. So I just bought a Mac Studio not that long ago. I don't really need to be in the market for yet another expensive computer, because what I'm talking about is the high-end version of the MacBook Air, not the entry-level one.
Right, yeah, it's certainly, that would be an expensive hobby, which is expensive enough as it is, without buying a new Mac every year. So
yes. I unfortunately did not get a review unit of the M2 MacBook Air. I was kind of hoping for one, but didn't work out this year, which is
that's rude.
Didn't work out. So maybe next time around, maybe I'll get some cool Apple glasses to be walking around in next winter.
Oh, don't. Sorry, that's not happening.
I'll take a picture of me in the shower, wearing them in the shower like Robert Scoble.
Perfect. That's a good throwback. That's
it is. He single-handedly destroyed Google Glass.
Oh, absolutely. Wow. I think we should end it on that note. That seems like a good place to end.
Sounds good. I'll talk to you later, Rob.
Speak to you soon.